Welcome to the COBOL-IT Learning Center. Installing the CitSQL family of pre-compilers. In this module, we will review the download and installation of each of the CitSQL Pre-compiler products. These include CitSQL for My SQL, CitSQL for PostgreSQL, and CitSQL for ODBC. After these exercises, you will be ready to begin using your CitSQL Pre-compiler. Let's get started. Prerequisites. The COBOL-IT compiler suite must be installed on your Linux or Windows server. The COBOL-IT compiler suite requires that you have a C compiler installed on your host computer. The sample programs used in these exercises are included with the CitSQL distribution. For further guidance, see the COBOL-IT e-learning modules titled, Installing COBOL-IT Compiler Suite Enterprise Edition on Linux or Installing COBOL-IT Compiler Suite Enterprise Edition on Windows. Let's briefly review our presentation. Overview. We will download the CitSQL archive. We will create the CitSQL installation directory. We will review licensing considerations. Finally, we will look at the sample programs, and what you need to do to get them to work. We will look at the scripts provided in your installation for pre-compiling, compiling and running your sample programs. We will end with a summary. Let's get started by downloading the CitSQL archive. COBOL-IT Online is the COBOL-IT portal for downloading software. We will download the CitSQL archive from COBOL-IT Online. In the panel on the left, enter the email address you have registered with COBOL-IT, and the password you received from COBOL-IT. Click on the Login button. When you have logged into COBOL-IT Online, you will see the Welcome screen. Select the Downloads option on the left panel to proceed to the download screen. This is the download screen. In the Active Authorizations window of the download screen, select COBOL-IT My SQL Pre-compiler. Active authorizations are the products you are currently authorized to download. Selecting COBOL-IT My SQL Pre-compiler will display a list of the products you may download. The CitSQL for My SQL Pre-compiler is available for Windows, Linux, and UNIX operating systems. Let's take a closer look. The CitSQL for My SQL archives begin with distrib My SQL, and are followed by the operating environment, and then an indicator for 32 bits, or 64 bits. If you require a 64-bit AIX archive, select distrib My SQL-AIX-64.tar.gz. Now let's look at the CitSQL for PostgreSQL archives. The CitSQL for PostgreSQL archives begin with distrib PGSQL, and are followed by the operating environment, and then an indicator for 32 bits, or 64 bits. If you require a 64-bit Linux archive, select distrib PGSQL-Linux-64.tar.gz. Now let's look at the CitSQL for ODBC archive. The CitSQL for ODBC archive is only available in a 32-bit format on Windows. The CitSQL for ODBC archive is named distrib ODBC-Windows-32.zip. Now let's look at how to create the CitSQL installation directory. Creating the CitSQL installation directory. First, copy the CitSQL archive into the COBOL-IT installation directory. In a 32-bit Linux or Unix environment, the default COBOL-IT installation directory is /opt/COBOL-IT. In a 64-bit Linux or Unix environment, The default COBOL-IT installation directory is /opt/COBOL-IT64. In the Windows environment, CitSQL is only available in the 32-bit format. In Windows, the default COBOL-IT installation directory is COBOL-IT. In Linux and Unix environments, use the taz-expf command to extract the CitSQL archive, and create the CitSQL installation directory. In Windows, use the unzip command to extract the CitSQL archive and create the CitSQL installation directory. Now let's take a look at licensing considerations. Licensing considerations. Copy the CitSQL-enabled license file from your Downloads folder into the COBOL-IT installation directory. Your software and license file are now installed. You can now proceed to validate your license. Validating the license. To validate your license, enter the bin directory of your CitSQL installation, and execute the pre-compiler with no options. CitSQL will display the version number, and the expiration date of your license, along with some other information. Now let's look at the CitSQL sample programs, which are located in the samples folder of your installation. The CitSQL sample programs are named CitTest and dbconnect. The dbconnect sample program includes an SQL connect statement which connects to a database and then writes and reads from the database. Here, we see an excerpt from the dbconnect program. Here, we see that the database is called DBU. The username is test_user. The password is test. The host is localhost. Let's examine this more closely. Programming the connection to the database. Looking at the SQL connect statement more closely, we can see that we must create a database called DBU on the local host. We must also create a user called test_user with password test. The user test_user must have privileges to log on to DBU, create and drop tables, and read and write data to DBU. My SQL and PostgreSQL provide interactive terminals in which you can execute SQL statements to perform these operations. They also provide workbenches which can do the same thing. ODBC is different. Let's take a closer look at the CitSQL for ODBC sample program now. The dbconnect sample program for CitSQL for ODBC is slightly different. In this excerpt from the dbconnect program, we see that the full connect string is assembled in a single variable with a string statement. The SQL connect statement requires the driver name and server name, in addition to the database, user ID, and password. Now, we'll briefly review using the ODBC Data Source Administrator to set up this connection to an SQL Server database through an ODBC data source so that this will work. This is the ODBC Data Source Administrator. To open the new data source wizard, click on the Add button. Create a new data source. Select SQL Server from the list of drivers. You will recall that the driver is included in our SQL Connect string. Click on the Finish button to open the wizard to create a new data source to SQL Server. Create a new data source to SQL Server. In the name entry field, we have entered test_user DSN. In the server selection field, we have selected DJSVAIO SQL Express. The server selection is also part of the SQL Connect string. Click on the Next button to continue. How should SQL Server verify the authenticity of the login ID? Select the radio button titled with SQL Server Authentication, then select the checkbox titled Connect to SQL Server to obtain default settings. Enter test_user as the login ID. Enter test as the password. Both the login ID and password are part of the SQL Connect string as well. Click on the Next button to continue. Change the default database to DBU. The default database is also included in our SQL Connect string. Keep the defaults. Click on the Next button to continue. On this screen, keep the defaults. Click on the Finish button to create your data source, and proceed to the ODBC Microsoft SQL Server Setup screen. Review the characteristics of your data source on the Setup screen. Click on the Test Data Source button to test your data source and see the test results screen. The Data Source Test screen reports that your tests completed successfully. Congratulations! Click on the OK button to exit the ODBC Data Source Administrator. Now, let's take a quick look at the scripts that are provided to use your CitSQL Pre-compiler with your COBOL-IT compiler and runtime. Pre-compiling the sample programs. Scripts are provided in the CitSQL distribution for pre-compiling and compiling your sample programs. The script is called compile.sh on Linux and Unix platforms. The script is called compile.bat on Windows platforms. Since the scripts include commands for pre-compiling and compiling, you should run the COBOL-IT setup script before you run these scripts. Now, let's take a quick look at the scripts that are provided to run the compiled programs. Running the sample programs. Scripts are provided in the CitSQL distribution for running your sample programs. The script is called run.sh on Linux and Unix platforms. The script is called run.bat on Windows platforms. Let's proceed to our summary now. Summary. In this module, we reviewed the download and installation of each of the CitSQL Pre-compiler products. We examined the sample programs, and reviewed how to prepare your database so that you could successfully run the sample programs. You are now ready to begin using your CitSQL Pre-compiler. For more detailed information, and the very latest reference documentation, please visit the doc folder under your COBOL-IT and CitSQL home directories. We encourage you to continue using the COBOL-IT Online training program. Thank you.